now we're kind of going toward the contemporary time zone. So we're moving into the right now, or at the very least, the turn of this century. And I am just going to go on and define what it is I'm going to talk about. Just a couple of quotations first. This is a line from an unpublished book by one of the people I worked with, who said, "We speak of London's mysterious twin, a shadow city of strangeness and magic that, from time to time, bleeds over into the dreary daytime world of office workers, sandwich shops, and stressed commuters." And I think it may just be worth saying that there's a kind of an element of relatively ordinary people finding, making, and creating sacred space here, which may perhaps contrast with some previous presentations. Maybe. I just decided to add that little note in just now because it may help. The key term at the moment will be New Age or esotericism. I think I will worry about the other ones as we go along. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit theory heavy at the beginning. So what is magic and what is esoteric magic? The reason that the spelling has the K on the end is to just distinguish it from the kind of David Copperfield style stage magic, because this is magic in the spiritual sense. It's not for me to try to define it in any absolute way, but a working definition of the subject is simply that magic, when it's carried out in the Western esoteric tradition, posits an animate, that's to say a living universe, which is pregnant with meanings pertinent to the individual spiritual seeker. And this universe and the individual seeker themselves can be changed and transmuted through a range of ritual spiritual practices. So to elaborate a little bit, the magical worldview, within the magical worldview, the boundary between one's inner mental world and the outer physical world is completely permeable. As within, so without, they say. And thoughts are things. And a mysterious energy is said to be everywhere, in the earth, in the air, and in all phenomena, animate and inanimate. It's a term, Aaron, I know you just used that term in your presentation, so we'll see perhaps at the end whether I'm meaning it in exactly the same way that you were. But for now, also many and various different dimensions also exist within the magical universe. So it's not just this physical realm, but different dimensions and their denizens are said to variously interpenetrate with the material realm. And all these aspects of magical thinking will impact on the magical, the esoteric experience of the urban environment. Now, I'm also going to be talking a little bit about mapping today, because the sacred city will be conceptualized very much as a map, or a series of maps, rather than a particular area or a particular point. So I'm not going to talk about any one particular place, although many places will be mentioned. And moreover, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated, these maps vary from individual to individual. They're personalized, meaning that if I had a map of magical London, it would not necessarily be the same as anybody else's map of magical London. Okay, so these things are all very unique to the individual, and then they're kind of built up in layers. So they're fairly complex, and we'll look at those layers in a moment. And also, perhaps most importantly, these maps are not regarded as complete. They are exploratory. There is an exploratory element to the sacred city. So it's kind of like a journey without maps as much as it is a journey with maps. Actually, it's about going forth into the unknown in a good modernist kind of a fashion, I think. Now, very simply, magic is very much associated with nature and animism, and the idea that nature is alive and full of soul or spirit. It's therefore not particularly difficult to just treat the magical city as consisting of the green spaces within the city. There are plenty of them, I'm sure, in most major cities, but there certainly are plenty of them in London. They may kind of be human made, but they're still green enough to look natural. And so for some people still, that's what the urban sacred is. You just go to a green place. The image that we've got there is the very top of Primrose Hill, which is North London, and there are some druids celebrating it was the autumn equinox of last year. However, as the third quotation on this slide shows, what do you do when glass and steel surround you, leaving you far from open field or forest? You don't always have to go and find green spaces because, according to Chris Penchak, they are always with you, hiding in the building, in the machines, and the vermin. The spirit world hides in plain sight, and it adapts. Its spirits are living and breathing in everything around you. They've always been there and waiting for you to find them again. So you don't have to go up a hill to find a green space if you want to do urban city magic. I will just briefly note that the animals of the city do play a real part in this. Obviously, the wildlife within the city is not quite that of the countryside or the rural realm, and it can be kind of quite grim at times. Actually, you get a lot of, obviously there are a lot of rats, foxes, something a little unromantic, but nevertheless it is potentially very, very magical. And kind of tribal totems are a fairly familiar, if much debated, concept within anthropology, and they have been adopted by magical practitioners, although again not without argument, often associated with personal crises or ordeals. And so we may come back to the issue of urban wildlife if there's time, but if not, that was just a quick slide on it. Moving away from nature, perhaps to history, there are some old animistic notions. There are plenty of genius loci, or genii locorum, I should say, to use the correct plural. And the image on the right is old Father Thames, who is the spirit of the river in London. And there are many other rivers. They may be slightly less visible now because quite often in cities they go underground, or are built over and possibly becoming part of the sewage network, which is the sewer network is what happened in London anyway. But there is no shortage of nature spirits are still known about, and used by esoteric practitioners now. And I'm just thinking the other best known example is probably William Blake, the poet, who famously saw angels in the trees of Peckham in South London. So moving on, because time is always limited, we have ley lines. Now, ley lines were simply paths of significance postulated by one Alfred Watkins back in the 1920s. But during the 1960s, they took on a much more overtly esoteric quality, and they became seen as these lines of force or lines of energy. They were initially associated with the countryside, but now they're very much part of urban esoteric life. And again, we get these kind of connections drawn by esotericists with feng shui, Aboriginal song lines, and other traditional schemes of earth magic. And there is a book on the right-hand side by Christopher Street, appropriately named, on London's ley lines, pathways of enlightenment. And as you can see, can you see? I'll make it clearer, just in case it's not obvious from the slide, that the cover of that book depicts a kind of magical symbol which has been created over a street map of London by noting certain significant points and then kind of drawing lines from one point to another, which has created, as well as various circles. There's five-pointed star there, which is a fairly well-known magical symbol. And that, again, I will talk about a little more if there is time. And then moving on to history, there is no shortage of history in any big city, but in London, it is very much entwined with esoteric thought and practice. You get the official history and a kind of alternative history as well. And I've got a quote here from someone I worked with who said, "As lovely as a trip to the open space of England is, I am a product of London. I never feel comfortable until I'm hemmed in by the higgledy-piggledy buildings, until I sense beneath my feet the forgotten rivers forcing their way through the earth beneath the tarmac roads, until I walk with the ghosts and murderers and kings and whores and marauders, until I am surrounded by the stench of sex and the racket of anarchy, until I feel the dank beneath of this necropolis on my neck, until the noise of millions of narratives reaching back centuries clogs my brain." Which I think is a very poetically put way to describe walking through London. Now, if I think I may have time to just talk a little bit about the image on the right, which is or was a graveyard, which was associated with social outcasts, the very poor, possibly sex workers who were denied a sort of official burial on Christian ground, and it was discovered in a sort of visionary moment by a local esoteric poet, who claims to have come across the spirit of a medieval sex worker, or early modern sex worker, who kind of indicated to him through poetry that this graveyard was deeply buried and not known about by him or many other people. But historical research has found that it is there, and it is not currently accessible because, unfortunately, it's on land, which is not public. So what you've got is a lot of decorations on the fence surrounding the site of this old graveyard, to kind of honor the spirits of the dead that reside within. And the locale is marked ritually with regular monthly rituals and processions, but you can theoretically go and see it anytime. And we did have gardens yesterday. To their great credit, the owners of the land, although they can't actually allow people anywhere near the graveyard itself, they have allowed the construction of a garden, which is really quite pleasant. And it seems to be a quite interesting example of a kind of up from the streets kind of a alternative history, just about coexisting peacefully with modern development and the slightly more commercial or practical interests of the City of London. The site itself is actually owned by the Transport Network. And so then I just wanted to say a little bit more about the way that one interacts with Sacred London, because although, as I've said, that there are kind of these maps in progress, it's a very, very unpredictable business. And there's a quote from the writer Alan Moore, who says, "You read the street plan's accidental creases and decode the orbit maps left there by coffee cups and go to work." So the choice of where you go it's very aleatory or divinatory. I mean, you can use tarot cards to decide where you might head off. And on the right hand side, that image actually shows a particular set of divinatory cards I think it's called the London Tarot. So they're specific images to London, but any system of divination will do. But it's literally not decided until you actually leave the house or leave the apartment where it is you're going to go on an exploration or a dérive. That word, let's see if I can annotate. Can I annotate? Yes, I think I can. Oh, there we go. Dérive, that is a word which kind of goes back to the surrealists or possibly further. And it is a way of walking without a specific purpose, just kind of experiencing what you experience, going where you feel compelled to go, where you feel guided to go. And there was a book, I have to reference the book, called City Magic, originally published in 2000, but sufficiently popular to be republished in 2012 by Christopher Penchak, who actually writes about American cities generally, because he's based in the US. But that was a book that was somewhat beloved of the people I worked with in London when I was conducting my anthropological fieldwork. And Penchak has a wonderful term which he calls sidewalking. Now, sidewalking, it's a kind of US English portmanteau term for what, as I've said, the surrealists would have termed the dérive. But as Hetherington has rightly pointed out, I better just say, he has noted that the practice goes back to Rimbaud, Baudelaire, even further, actually. So you could probably find origins pre-surrealism. And then we get these ongoing, almost random journeys, not traditional pilgrimages in the sense that they're not going to a specific destination, but you get people setting out on this kind of journey without maps, as I say. The only destination is kind of further, and to continue exploring. But to borrow the words of J.R.R. Tolkien, not all those who wander are lost. And then reading The Sacred City, Penchak says you will see people and places in ways you've never imagined. Buildings will speak to you. Each home has a spirit. By walking by an object, you breathe its energy. City gods are speaking through the statues and sculptures. Be prepared for anything. And also, he has this thing about keeping an eye out for interesting graffiti, advertising signs, street signs, even street art can be said to have some kind of esoteric significance, such as the image on the right, which I took myself. I take that to represent Eros in some way. And then taking this further, there is this sense of esoteric practitioners when they're going on these urban walks or these urban explorations, these dérives, they can almost enter a sort of entranced state. Now, actually, that may or may not be unique to esoterists. You may walk through the city and think that a lot of people are wandering around in a trance. I don't know, but there is a very spiritual kind of trance which can be achieved. And there is a long, but I think rather wonderful quote from Alan Moore here, who was writing about a London writer called Arthur Machen, who may not be hugely well known, but it's a very poetic quote, which I think deserves reading in full. So Alan Moore is imagining Machen walking through London in a kind of a visionary frenzy, and he talks of exotic tableaux, fabulous grotesques in every court or close along the Gray's Inn Road. The lanes and alleyways become another place, transformed by the lodestone silver of imagination. Shabby promenades are made new, made souks and minarets in the mind's moonlight. The gated yards of Holborn shiver with phantasmagoria, and every gas lamp has its blue and hissing genie. There are roc's eggs hatching in the rain spouts. Everyone knows this moon town that has ever dreamed or wondered. In our reveries, we window shop at its emporiums, and in our fevers ride wild, steaming horses down its avenues. the peeling letters of the shop fronts are shapes borrowed from some angel lexicon, and every vendor's unintelligible cry is made the prayer call to a new impending Palestine, its eaves and gables fluttering with Pentecost. Undressed of earthly circumstance, London is Nineveh, Byzantium is Blake's Jerusalem, and Joyce's Dublin. And so that, as I say, was Alan Moore, who I should say is very much involved in esoteric thought and writing, as well as being involved in various movies. I can say more about that at the end if need be. But now I want to move on to a slightly less positive side of all this. Because although I know the conference is about the sacred, but we actually get this idea, not even an idea of the profane, but an idea of pollution, which I'm taking unproblematically to just kind of be an opposite of the sacred. It would be very nice to have more time to go into exactly what we mean by sacred, profane, and indeed polluted, but I haven't got time to do that here. But anyway, there is an ugly opposite of sacred, which is usually related to development or development of certain kinds. There is an anxiety of different kinds of technology, new forms of technology. The electromagnetism of the, used to be the electricity network, but I suppose now it's the mobile phone network, can sometimes become the subject of anxieties, spiritual anxieties. And to a certain degree, as well as there being a positive side to the urban sacred, to a significant degree, there is a negative side to it too. And then it does kind of blur into what some people have recently started to term conspirituality, which is this kind of conspiracy thinking whereby certain developments are viewed as kind of somehow nefarious or evil in some sense. I don't think I'm going to have time to read that entire slide, but never mind. I'm just focusing on the last point. You can see that on the top of the Canary Wharf Tower, on the image there, there is a pyramid. Now, pyramids are known to accumulate energy, or so the esotericists tell us. And because that's very much associated with the finance district of London, it's viewed very negatively by, shall we say, that school of esoteric thought, which is not comfortable with capitalism. And there are many and various examples of that kind of thinking. Sadly, no time to dwell on them, but if anybody has questions about that, I will be delighted to say more later. And then I think I'm going to start moving to a conclusion now. The thing that we've got to deal with here is that we have this idea of magical energy. It's both a description and a prescription of the multiplicity within urban magic. If you imagine sort of currents of energy flowing all around the city, in the minds of these esoteric thinkers, I think that would be the closest thing to a vision of the esoteric city that I could actually produce, the closest thing to an image that I can produce. So you've got all these kind of crackling, buzzing lines of energy, or these flows of energy. So everything is very much in flux. It reminds one of Sigmund Bauman's liquid modernity, actually, but the idea of the universe in flux probably goes back a lot further than that. But it's very fitting for late modernity or contemporary times in which change seems to be the only permanence. And so we have these very idiosyncratic maps and models of the esoteric city. Now, how on earth do you make sense of that? How do you study something which is in a state of constant flux? There are ways to kind of minimize one's own headache. And in geography, relatively recently, there was a move towards the notion of the assemblage would be the English way to pronounce it, or assemblage would be the French way to pronounce it, or at least I'll do my best to say it in a French sounding way, because it does come from Deleuze and Guattari, and actually again goes back to French art. I think it probably goes back to the Surrealists, maybe even further. But two geographers who have influenced this presentation, Ben Anderson and Colin McFarlane, have said that the notion of assemblage, it can be used to emphasize emergence and multiplicity and indeterminacy. And it connects to this, it was very trendy in geography a few years ago, this kind of wider definition or redefinition of socio-spatial matters in terms of the composition of diverse elements in some form of quite provisional socio-spatial formation. In simple terms, rather than just saying that place there is sacred because, you need to say something which is rather more open-ended and say that this area here has the potential to be sacred in the following ways to the following groups of people. And then it should allow us to remain open as to the form of the unity, durability, and the types of relations between the human and non-human elements involved. So to sum up, everywhere, I suppose, in the esoteric city has the potential to be sacred, pretty much, but equally everywhere has the potential to be its opposite, polluted. And that can be in a spiritual sense or in a political sense, possibly both. So although the sort of the sacred city that we initially looked at, looking at the green areas and the historical phenomena, that's maybe relatively straightforward, although I think some of the history perhaps veers into the realm of alternative history or conspiracy theories and various paranormal phenomena, which are beyond the realm of mainstream science, at least at the moment. But the other elements which make up the magician's map kind of involve personal significance of places, and some quite accidental sort of aleatory elements which may only have significance to a small group of individuals or even one particular person at one particular time. And such significance may not endure over time. It's quite common to talk to people who are involved in the esoteric city who say that, oh, well, we used to like such and such an area, but the energy's all changed now. It's not like it used to be. We don't go there anymore. And sometimes explanations can be provided for that, but it's not always even sort of felt to be necessary to provide explanations, but usually some kind of shift in the physical or esoteric makeup of the locale is responsible for a change in its esoteric significance. And so any sort of esoteric map has to be subject to ongoing revision according to new developments and activities. So it's kind of like a sat nav with kind of live information on it. The map kind of needs to somehow be imagined as being live, and it's a changing cityscape, just as the flows of traffic are kind of changing on a sat nav map. And so just to quickly conclude then, what's the difference between a kind of traditional sacred and the sort of late modern sacred that I'm trying to get at here through a study of esoteric thought? On the left-hand side in white, I've created a list of traditional ideas of the sacred, and on the right-hand side in yellow, I have kind of tried to sum up my findings for the purposes of today. Yes, okay, I'm probably drawing this in quite broad and clumsy strokes, but it's my summing up slide. I think I would just like to leave you with that. I think I'm finishing exactly 1 minute early, but probably best to be early than late, I think. So I will leave it there and look forward to any questions. Thank you very much.